Across America, BP supports more than 275,000 jobs to keep energy flowing. Jobs like building grid-scale solar energy in Ohio and producing gas with fewer operational emissions in Texas. It's and, not or. See what doing both means for energy nationwide at bp.com/investing in America.
The stress and crowds of holiday shopping can put a damper on your holiday spirit, and you don't always find all the perfect gifts you're looking for. The Virginia Lottery's games make easy and tremendously fun gifts for all the adults in your life, even you. Spruce up your gift-giving game this holiday season with the Virginia Lottery. The Virginia Lottery's holiday scratchers are a gift any adult will love. Treat yourself to some winter wonderment and play the lottery's holiday online instant games from anywhere in Virginia. Visit valottery.com/holiday. Please gift responsibly. Lottery games are not for minors.
Hey, it's Ryan Holiday, host of the Daily Stoic podcast. When I bought my first house in 2013, part of the way I paid for it was we would rent it out on Airbnb in Austin when there was South by Southwest or F1 or ACL. And then later, when that tiny little house became my office, I would work there, I'd do my writing during the week. Then on the weekends, we'd rent it out to people who were coming in from out of town on Airbnb. And you may be sitting on an Airbnb and not even know it. You've probably had the same experience. You stayed in an Airbnb and thought, this is doable. Maybe I could rent my place on Airbnb. And it's really that simple. You can start with a spare room or you can rent your whole place. Maybe you're traveling to see friends and family for the holidays. While you're away, your home could be an Airbnb. Your home might be worth more than you think. Find out at airbnb.com/host.
Content warning. This episode contains discussion of violence and murder.
The code phrase was supposed to be, "We walked the dogs." That would signal that Greg Markham had completed the murder he had agreed to carry out. Those innocuous words would let Jon Green know that everything had gone according to his devious plan.
Ryan Michael Gonzalez heard all of that. Lying on the top bunk, hovering above where Markham and his illicit would-be employer sat, he heard everything. See, Gonzalez had landed in New Mexico's Eddy County Detention Center on January 9th, 2023. There, he met Markham, who he described as a big, tall guy. He also met one Jon Green. Green occupied the bunk below Gonzalez. Green was an older white man with pale eyes.
Green treated his bed as a conference space, as Gonzalez tells it. He and Markham would sit there together, making all of the necessary arrangements. Their mutual goal was to murder someone they called Dr. Lark. For Green, the slaying was an urgent matter. Gonzalez heard him say that if they did not kill her, he would lose everything. The topic of the dogs was also ever present. Green stressed how very important his dogs were to him. He wanted those dogs back. He was a dog lover, after all.
The murder plot was relatively simple. Markham was motivated by money, according to Gonzalez. Green would provide the funds. He would bond Markham out of jail. He would provide Markham with a camper and a truck as payment. A sort of barter system version of a contract hit.
Green went over every aspect of the plan with Markham. Markham would go to Dr. Lark's home. He was skilled with electrical work, so he could easily short out the power. He would sneak into the garage and wait there in the darkness until Dr. Lark arrived home. She would pull her car into the gloomy space. Once the garage door went down, she would be trapped. Markham would pounce. He would force Dr. Lark to consume fentanyl. The idea was to make the murder appear like an overdose.
In other iterations of the plan, Green wanted to find someone familiar with Mexico who could find a remote stretch south of the border. That party could dig a hole and drop Dr. Lark down into it. At one point, after Gonzalez made a comment about wanting to go to Mexico, Markham made a beeline towards him. He wanted to know how well Gonzalez knew Mexico exactly. He seemed to be reaching out on behalf of Green. Gonzalez wasn't the only inmate they approached either. A man named Ryan Morgan, who had been jailed on murder charges, even warned Gonzalez about Green and Markham. They wanted to embroil others in their scheme, he said. Word gets around to jail fast. Green was desperate to kill Dr. Lark, and he wasn't shy about bringing up the subject, as far as Gonzalez heard.
At first, things went according to Green's plan.
He arranged to have $2,500 sent via Cash App to a woman who bonded out Markham.
But eventually, Green discovered he'd been swindled. Markham's bond was only $1,500. His would-be hitman buddy had conned him. Gonzalez figured that indicated that Markham was just a scammer who had zero intention of murdering anyone.
Gonzalez pieced things together from there. Dr. Lark was Dr. Kim Lark, Green's wife or ex-wife. It wasn't quite clear. Finally, Green started sliding up to him directly. Green talked about money with his bunkmate. He spoke about innocuous business ventures, like how he sold his house. That had netted him $50,000. Green said he needed that money for a Netflix deal. He told Gonzalez that he had written a book about a, quote, incident involving Russia. Even if Netflix passed, he had another company lined up. He knew he had a story worth selling.
Green also talked about the business of murder. He said he would pay anyone who killed his wife $50,000. He even laid out a payment plan, $10,000 to $20,000 up front, and then another $50,000 to $60,000 after Dr. Lark was confirmed dead. Gonzalez said Green talked about his motivation. He wanted access to all of their property, along with $750,000 in insurance money.
Gonzalez and Green spent 2 months living in close proximity. Ultimately, though, Green was allegedly caught snorting contraband. He was transferred out of the cell block. Gonzalez was released. He left jail with the impression that Green would keep trying to murder his wife. The man seemed hell-bent on making it happen, no matter what. With such a level of determination, he was bound to eventually run into an inmate who is willing to actually carry out the plan.
Shortly after his release from the Eddy County Detention Center, Gonzalez got into trouble yet again, this time in Texas. He was booked into jail in Taylor County on March 6, 2023. On that day, he sat down and wrote out a letter to Dr. Lark. He figured her life was still in danger. He wanted to warn her. He also wanted some help paying for his $40,000 bond. Perhaps he could make a deal with the doctor and give her life-saving details in exchange for some money.
Would the letter arrive in time? Would Dr. Lark be able to afford Gonzalez's terms? And who exactly was this mysterious Jon Green? This dog lover allegedly so intent on putting out a hit on his wife. This man who, according to Gonzalez, had such a penchant for coming up with elaborate murder schemes. Well, we can tell you. See, Green wasn't the man's original name. That was a new name, a new identity he adopted for himself. A second name for his second chance at life. Jon Green was originally called Ted Maher. He's been known as many things over the years. Green Beret, father, registered nurse, author, arsonist, murderer.
In the early 2000s, he was convicted for setting fire to a luxury penthouse in Monte Carlo, and this fire resulted in 2 deaths. Now, prosecutors in New Mexico's Eddy County say he tried to spark an elaborate murder conspiracy.
This is a story with many bizarre twists and turns. Aging billionaires, international smear campaigns, alleged Russian hitmen, late-night jail escapes, the abduction of 3 search and rescue canines, including a dog heavily pregnant with puppies, and of course, murders. In this episode, we will take you through the whole unbelievable saga. We will start off talking about Ted Maher and the crime he's best known for. Then we will get into what he's accused of doing under his new alias, Jon Green. We'll refer to the man at the heart of this twisted story as both Ted Maher and Jon Green in order to respect his name change. Just remember, Maher and Green are one and the same. And please remember that despite Maher/Green's past, his current legal troubles are ongoing. The prosecution has put out their side in various court documents, but we all must consider that the defense has not necessarily had the same opportunity yet. You're hearing all of this here first, on the murder sheet. While news outlets picked up on Maher/Green's recent dog-related legal drama, nobody else has this story about the alleged murder plot. We are grateful to have the opportunity to report out a scoop and move this story forward. My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is the return of Ted Maher, Billionaire Edmond Safra's killer, accused of plotting yet another murder.
Before we talk about Ted Maher, who, as we mentioned, is now going by the name Jon Green, we need to talk about his victims. In the waning days of 1999, he set a fire and sparked a panic that resulted in the deaths of 2 people. So who were those 2 people found suffocated inside a stifling penthouse dressing room? Let's talk about the billionaire and the nurse.
Edmond Safra was the billionaire. He was born in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1932. The Safras were a wealthy and prominent Sephardic Jewish family. Edmond Safra's father, Jacob, had started the Banque de Crédit National in 1929. Safra went to work for the family business when he was just 16. He turned out to be a natural, but all was not well in Beirut. Following the founding of Israel in 1948, a surge in anti-Jewish prejudice in the Middle East forced the Safras to flee to Brazil, where they founded Banco Safra S.A. By then, Safra was looking to set off on his own.
A banker with a flair for brash moves, Safra thrived in the business. He was especially apt at converting some of the world's richest individuals into loyal private customers. They followed him from venture to venture, and so did their money. He founded several major banks like the Trade Development Bank in Geneva, Switzerland, and the Republic National Bank of New York, as well as the Hermitage Capital Management hedge fund.
He attracted controversies, including one in 1957, when the United States Bureau of Narcotics ran a report identifying Safra as a drug trafficker, and then later quickly withdrew the accusation. Much later in the 1980s, a $550 million deal with American Express soured, prompting the conglomerate to kick off a years-long smear campaign against Safra. American Express went to the press in France, Italy, Peru, and Switzerland, spreading lies that the Federal Bureau of Investigation was digging into Safra's connection to everything from the Iran-Contra affair, to the mafia, to drug trafficking. You can read all about that wild story in Vendetta, American Express and the Smearing of Edmond Safra by Brian Burrow. Safra fought back, securing a groveling public apology from American Express, along with donations to the tune of millions of dollars to charities of his choice. In 1998, Safra's Republic Bank was once again in the international spotlight when they flagged a huge money laundering scheme involving the International Monetary Fund and high-placed Russian officials. It is fair to say that Safra made a few enemies over the years.
Despite his success, or perhaps because of it, Safra remained an intensely private man, somewhat unlike his socialite wife, Lily, who was a very wealthy woman in her own right before the couple wed later in life. The Safras never had children together, but they did share stepchildren from Lily's earlier marriages. He could come across as reclusive and worried about his safety, but those who knew him also described him as incredibly generous, especially to causes amongst the international Sephardic community that he championed. In the Jewish Week, friends described him as the kind of person nice enough to field a litany of financial questions and appeals for help from absolute strangers at weddings and bar mitzvah celebrations. He had a few quirks, too. Safra loved the number 5. He never went without his book of Psalms. He also walked around with tiny blue gems in his pocket to help ward off the evil eye.
In 1999, on the cusp of a new century, Safra was set to make a major change. He had agreed to sell Safra Republic Holdings and the Republic New York Corporation. The buyer was to be HSBC Holdings, formerly the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation. The deal was worth $10.3 billion, cash. In early December of that year, the sale was not quite finalized. Perhaps Safra was looking forward to spending more time on his philanthropy work, or with his family, or traveling. But there was another reason behind his retirement. Since he'd reached his early 60s, he had struggled with Parkinson's disease.
Parkinson's is a progressive brain disorder that causes symptoms like unintended and uncontrollable movements, leading to issues with mobility and communication. The disease gets worse and worse over time, and that had been Safra's experience, unfortunately. By the time he was 67, he required a full-time nursing team. The nurses he employed worked for a firm called Spotless and Bright. The next two important figures in this case belonged to that team.
We told you that we would introduce you to the two victims in this case, the billionaire and the nurse. Vivian Torrente was the nurse. There isn't a lot of information out there about Torrente. She was not prominent and powerful like Safra, but her life mattered just as much.
Media reports indicate Torrente came from the Philippines, although it's unclear to us if she was of Filipino descent or if she actually immigrated from there. We do know that she lived in New Jersey. On June 23, 1985, the Sunday News of Ridgewood, New Jersey reported that Torrente and her husband lived in Washington Township in New Jersey's Bergen County. They had filed a lawsuit over a business deal gone wrong. That may speak to some financial pressures they were facing at the time. We also know that Torrente had 2 children, a son and a daughter.
By 1999, Torrente had become one of the nurses who worked for Safra. Her daughter Genevieve later told NBC that her mother, quote, just told me she got this great job, it pays well, she gets to travel. So how big exactly was this Spotless and Bright team? We've seen different accounts of how many nurses were on the team. Figures range anywhere from 12 to 6. One of Torrente's colleagues later claimed to like the 52-year-old nurse very much, finding her to be kind and motherly.
That co-worker was Ted Maher. How he came to join Safra's squadron of nurses is a bizarre tale in and of itself. At the Murder Sheet, we spend so much time digging into crime stories that sometimes it's difficult to find the time to plan out and cook elaborate, nutritious meals. That's why we are so excited about our sponsor, Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal delivery service. Our sponsors make this podcast possible. So if you go to factormeals.com/msheet and use our special code MSheet, you're not just getting half off this high-quality meal plan. You're supporting us too.
So I'm obsessed with Factor. I had their creamed corn chicken and their tomato basil chicken risotto recently. Both were delicious. That risotto in particular was amazing. Plus, the whole process was a breeze. All I had to do was pop the meal into the microwave. The food was tasty and flavorful, which is no surprise given that each recipe is specifically crafted by chefs and approved by dietitians.
Having Factor during the hectic holiday season has been a boon, especially with us pumping out so many episodes. Head to factormeals.com/msheet and use code MSheet to get 50% off. That's code MSheet at factormeals.com/msheet to get 50% off.
Have you heard? You can listen to your gripping investigations ad-free. Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app or visit amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. That's amazon.com/truecrime ad-free. And catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
Hey listeners, this is Candace DeLong, the host of Killer Psyche. Imagine all your audio entertainment available in just one place. That's what the Audible app is all about. With Audible, you can always find the best of what you love or discover something new. Audible has an incredible selection of mystery and thriller titles and originals like Something Ain't Right by Roger and Zachary Stringer, The Space Within by Greg O'Connor and Josh Fagan, and Moriarty, an Audible original. Membership includes access to Audible originals, podcasts, and tons of audiobooks that you can download or stream as much as you want. And as an Audible member, you can choose one title per month from an ever-growing catalog of titles to keep. The Audible app makes it easy to listen anytime, anywhere, whether you're traveling, working out, doing chores, wherever your day takes you. New members can try Audible now for free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/DeLong or text DeLong to 500-500.
It's important to note that Theodore or Ted Maher sounded great on paper.
Born in Maine and growing up in California and upstate New York, Maher opted to serve his country as a young man. In the mid-1970s, he joined the elite United States Army Special Forces, commonly known as the Green Berets. He later leveraged that stint with the military to help pay for his education after he returned to New York. He studied at Dutchess County Community College and Pace University, securing a nursing degree.
From there, he went to work at a prestigious hospital, New York Presbyterian. New York Presbyterian is one of the world's biggest hospitals and consistently ranks as one of the best hospitals in the United States. It's a sprawling institution, boasting affiliations with both Columbia University and Cornell University, and, at this point, multiple campuses and a whole network of affiliated hospitals. Maher landed a job as a registered nurse on the neonatal unit at the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, now known as the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. One of the institution's flagship centers, this place now stretches between 165th and 169th Streets in Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan. Maher worked there for 9 years.
His then-wife Heidi also served as a temporary nurse at the same hospital. They resided upstate in New York's Dutchess County, making their home in the hamlet of Stormville. That is over 60 miles to the north of the hospital where they worked. Together, the Mahers started a family. They shared 3 children, including a son from Maher's previous marriage.
At work, Maher could come across as quite serious, even remote to some. But various news reports would ultimately indicate that his colleagues felt Maher was diligent toward the infants he was tasked with caring for. In 1999, things seemed to be going well for Maher. By the end of the year, he would be facing murder allegations. But on the surface, he was a 41-year-old father with a respected job at a top hospital. Then he found the camera.
Someone had left a camera in one of the hospital rooms. Maher happened to discover it. But he didn't turn it into hospital security. Instead, he had the film developed himself. He saw the pictures of a couple and their newborn twins. He remembered that family and tracked them down himself. The camera's owner, the father of the twins, was touched and impressed over the return of the first photographs he had ever snapped of his babies. And he happened to be in a position to reward his new friend Maher.
See, the couple who had lost their camera weren't just anybody. They were Harry and Laura Slatkin. They were a New York City power couple who successfully made the jump from Wall Street to entrepreneurship. Dubbed by the New York Times as the king of home fragrance, Harry Slatkin now runs brands like Homeworks, Scentworks, and Slatkin & Company.
Slatkin knew someone who was looking for an excellent nurse. He put in a good word for Maher. On August 4th, 1999, Maher interviewed for the job with billionaire Edmond Safra's personal assistant. His military background impressed Safra's team. They offered him the job.
At that point, Maher was very much looking for a new role. He had a family to support. He was still struggling to pay legal bills from his custody battle with his former wife over his oldest son. He also knew tough times might be ahead at the hospital. The day after the interview, the New York Times ran a piece noting that the New York State Nurses Association had called a strike amongst the 1,600 registered nurses working for Columbia Presbyterian. 5 days later, a tentative deal was reached between the union and the hospital. But as far as Maher was concerned, caring for a billionaire was a dream job. Court TV reported that he would be paid $475 a day. Other sources say $600 a day. Maher ended up taking the job, even though it meant upending his old life. The effects may not have hit him right away, though. From September 15th to October 27th of 1999, Maher was still working close to home, tending to his new employer in Safra's Manhattan residence, before they all left the country. According to a Vanity Fair article from journalist Dominic Dunn, Safra was known as a good employer who was, quote, warm and affectionate with his various staffers. By all accounts, Maher and his new billionaire patient got along quite well. He even impressed Safra when he fixed up a broken air conditioner. On the surface, things seemed to be looking up for Safra's new nurse.
But there were downsides to Maher's job. Safra divided his time between several different properties in New York City, Geneva, Monaco, and the French Riviera. That meant quite a lot of travel. Perhaps a perk for some, but a problem for others. Maher had to live in a hotel, far away from his family. He struggled to adapt to the quiet environment, so different from the constant chaos in a big city hospital. He also hated being the new guy on staff, after having established his bona fides in New York. Media reports indicate that Maher clashed with Sonia Herkrath, the head nurse for Safra. She had allegedly regarded him as the new flavor of the month. Maher became convinced she was sabotaging him, switching up his schedule. On November 20th, Maher was officially onboarded as a full-time nurse. By November 28th, Heidi would recall that her husband was so unhappy with the new gig that he was making plans to return home before Christmas and go back to New York Presbyterian. One snarky comment seemed to especially affect Maher. While in Monaco, the nurse told his colleagues that he walked 35 miles in a day to see San Remo in Italy. "Oh my God," remarked one top Safra aide, according to CNN, "we hired a Forrest Gump."
But there was a dark side to Maher, too, according to some who knew him. Both his father and 2 other relatives suffered from schizophrenia, according to CBS. His behavior could be troubling. The other nurses and staffers he worked with often found him bizarre and off-putting at times. They weren't alone. Before he met Heidi, he wed a woman named Marla. According to Time, she secured a divorce in 1991, telling her friends that it was a nightmare of a marriage. She said Maher physically abused her and threatened to murder her in between rounds of Russian roulette. Leonard Lavelle, Maher's 70-year-old closest neighbor in Stormville, also had negative things to say about him to Time. "Maher and his wife would stand outside my house and scream curses and give me the finger," he said. He went on to say that Maher once beat him and threatened to kill him with a gun.
But no one could have anticipated what came next for Maher. He traveled with Safra's entourage to the billionaire's residence in Monte Carlo, in Monaco. Let's do some scene setting. The Principality of Monaco is a micro-state in the French Riviera. Monte Carlo is an administrative area, renowned for its wealth and namesake casino. Safra and his staffers settled into the penthouse of the La Belle Epoque building. On the outside, Safra's residence was a beautiful 2-story penthouse, sitting atop 4 stories of banking offices, but the luxury was underscored with a plethora of security measures. The latest in bulletproof glass windows, armored doors, security alarms, and surveillance cameras. Even the most worried tycoon ought to feel safe, surrounded by all of those precautions. Unfortunately, that feeling of safety would turn out to be an illusion, or even a trap.
December 3rd, 1999 was the kind of day that frustrated Maher. A last-minute rescheduling saw him working the overnight shift with his colleague Vivian Torrente. At 3 a.m., Torrente replaced Maher on the night shift. She reportedly mentioned the Forrest Gump crack to him. It must have seemed obvious to Maher that many of his coworkers didn't take him too seriously. But according to his first story to police, any frustrations he felt must have quickly turned into abject horror.
The penthouse's fire alarm went off at 4:49 a.m. 4 minutes later, Maher staggered down to the lobby, bleeding. He told a night watchman he'd been stabbed by commandos. 2 hooded attackers broke in. He tried to fight them off. Before he fled the penthouse, he passed along a cell phone to Torrente so she could call for help.
At 5 a.m., Torrente called Hercraft, the head nurse. She and Safra had fled after Maher raised the alarm about intruders, and they were in a secure dressing room. She asked the head nurse to call the police, saying that Maher had been stabbed. Torrente stayed on the phone and made more calls that morning, including to Monaco police and La Belle Epoque's building security team. Later calls may have also occurred between Safra and his wife Lily, according to some media reports. Authorities later said she begged her husband to come out of the dressing room, but he was too frightened to listen. Still other calls from passers-by and neighbors came in about the smoke pouring from the building.
At 5:20 a.m., first responders brought Maher to Princess Grace Hospital. At that time, Samuel Cohen, Safra's security chief, showed up at La Belle Epoque. Cohen was immediately skeptical of Maher's tale about the intruders, according to Safra's biographer Daniel Gross. He wanted to go in. He had all the keys and knew the layout of the penthouse. He thought he could rescue both his boss and the nurse. Police blocked him, so he decided to go around them. He rode the elevator up to the 5th floor where police confronted him. They snapped handcuffs on him.
Torrente called the head nurse again at 5:30 a.m. That was her 4th call. In that call, Court TV reported that Safra sounded calm in the background. He wanted the police. Nobody mentioned anything about smoke.
At 6 a.m., Cohen finally convinced the police to allow him to help. Together, they rescued Lily Safra from a 6th-floor window, prying it open to allow her onto a fire escape. Some reports indicate that Safra's stepdaughter was rescued as well. At 6:15 a.m., firefighters started trying to contain the blaze in earnest. By that time, the smoke had gotten into the penthouse's air conditioning system, meaning that toxic fumes were getting blasted just about everywhere.
At 6:30 a.m., Torrente called Hercraft. Hercraft told her to stuff wet towels beneath the door, but by then it was too late. Torrente said she was slipping into unconsciousness. Coughing could be heard in the background. Safra was choking too. The call ended quite suddenly. That was the last time anyone heard from either Torrente or Safra. At 6:51 a.m., the police declared that the hostile intruders were no longer a danger to first responders. Firefighters finally got to go in. One even opened up the door of the bedroom, which led to the dressing room. But tragically, he didn't check the dressing room immediately.
The firefighters finally broke through the dressing room at 7:45 a.m. and recovered Torrente and Safra. She lay out on a leopard rug. He sat in a red armchair. They were both dead, asphyxiated. There were no wet towels under the door. Writing for Vanity Fair, Dominic Dung described the scene in gruesome detail, saying Safra's flesh was incinerated, and that his eyes had, quote, popped out of his head. Writing about the autopsy photos for Newsweek, Christopher Dickey described Safra as having no signs of major trauma, and in fact having died with a slight, ironic smile on his lips. He doesn't mention burns or eyeballs. This is one case where a lot of details are all over the place from source to source.
One aspect of this awful incident that immediately garnered attention were the absent bodyguards. Safra employed a well-trained private security team. As it turned out, none of them were on duty the night of the fire. Different reports indicate that Safra or Lily may have dismissed them, owing to their belief that the penthouse was sufficiently fortified. They may have viewed the bodyguards as necessary at larger, more sprawling estates. A Washington Post article indicates that Cohen, the security chief, noted the new bodyguard shift was meant to start at 5 a.m. that day, meaning that the Safras missed out on the arrival of a protector by just a few minutes. That same article also indicated that the security alarm system in the penthouse may not have been working. Still, authorities began to scrutinize a more surprising suspect. Maher, the heroic nurse.
His story of bravery and daring unraveled fast. The evidence just didn't match his claims. The intricate system of closed-circuit television cameras all throughout the building detected no intruders. His tale also kept changing. First, he was jumped by 2 hooded men. Then that switched to an unmasked attacker. He'd been stabbed twice, not seriously. Despite his thrilling combat with the assailants, his clothes were not torn at all. When authorities found a bloody switchblade, it turned out to be Maher's. He also readily admitted to setting the fire. He claimed that it had been a desperate gambit to gain attention from the outside. Later, the narrative would shift slightly. Police and prosecutors reasoned that the whole incident had been a desperate gambit to gain attention from Safra.
On December 7th, 1999, Monaco authorities announced that Maher had confessed. He told them the real story. He was jealous of the other nurses, feeling undermined, feeling belittled. He wanted to do something to really impress Safra. What's more impressive than saving a man's life? He plunged the blade of his own knife into his stomach and thigh, told Torrente about the made-up intruders, and set about sounding the alarm. He decided to drop alcohol or toilet paper and a lit candle, one of Howard Slatkin's apparently, yes, that's the guy who helped him get the job in the first place, into a waste bin. He held the small blaze up to a fire alarm. Then, he abandoned Torrente and Safra to their fates, leaving them as they huddled in fear of the fictitious knife-wielding hitmen and the very real, very much out of control fire.
Violent crime was a rarity in Monaco. The Maher case proved out to be their trial of the century. The international press also followed it closely, owing to the twists and turns and the centering of a mysterious billionaire. The legal battle, however, dragged on for years before even going to trial. In that time, rumors swirled within Monaco's elite circles. It was widely said that in an autopsy he had found 2 slugs in Safra's corpse. Could Maher be a fall guy? Could Safra have been murdered by Russian hitmen, out for revenge over the exposure of the international IMF money laundering scheme? Or perhaps someone with an interest in wrecking the sale of Safra's bank to HSBC, which ultimately went through after his murder. Or perhaps Safra's estranged family members were to blame. He and his brothers, after all, had not gotten along for years. Perhaps even Lily herself had a motive. Ultimately, in 2002, Monaco's chief prosecutor, Daniel Serde, took the case. In a statement to the press, he described Maher as psychologically fragile and under the influence of medication. He contended that Maher was addicted to sedatives. Lying awake at 3 a.m., mulling over the Forrest Gump jab and other indignities, Maher confessed to police that his dark thoughts had gotten the best of him and prompted him to set the disaster in motion. Serde referred to the plot as Maher's hellish machine. Oh, and the rumors about the bullets found in Safra's body were false, by the way.
The defense, local Monaco lawyers assisted by American attorney Michael Griffith, ultimately dropped the intruder theory altogether. They acknowledged that Maher set the fire. They argued that his intent had never been to kill anyone. He loved his employer. He had no reason to want to murder Safra or Torrente. He simply wanted to ingratiate himself even more with the billionaire, and perhaps undermine his staff enemy, Herkrath, in the process. By incurring injuries in defense of Safra, he would look like the big hero. It would almost be a more violent replay of the camera incident, a sweeping gesture to prove his worth to rich benefactors. His actions were, in fairness, stupid and insane, according to his attorney, Michael Griffith, but just not intentionally evil. He hadn't meant for the fire to spread, for the rescue to take hours, for his beloved employer and colleague to asphyxiate while hiding from the terror he invented. During the trial, media reports indicated that Maher never exhibited remorse and continued to behave oddly. Still, a complicated story managed to come out during the proceedings. The truth was that if the early morning disaster had played out slightly differently, if Maher had come clean about his fictitious intruders immediately, if Cohen had been allowed to continue with his rescue attempt, if police had secured the building faster for their firefighter counterparts, if the firefighters had found the right door, if Safra had been willing to chance an escape, then nobody needed to have died. On some level, there may have been culpability to go around. But as far as the law was concerned, only one person had lit up that wastebasket.
In December of 2002, a jury convicted Maher. He was sentenced to a decade in prison. The prosecution had asked for 12 years. The next month, on January 21st, 2003, Maher made a break for it. He and an Italian prisoner sawed off the window bars from their prison cell and then climbed outside, down a rope fashioned from black garbage bags. Maher made it all the way to Nice in France. Hiding out in a hotel, he called his wife Heidi and asked for money. He gloated about making the police look stupid. But within 7 hours, he was back in custody.
The murder trial wasn't the only legal wrangling done. That's perhaps to be expected in the death of a billionaire.
Safra's wife Lily had inherited over $4 billion. Safra's family brought her to court over allegations that she had not given the late billionaire's siblings their inheritance. Rumors flew that Lily had come between Safra and his brothers and sisters. Some journalists mulled over the possibility that the murders had been the result of a family feud.
Torrente's adult children, Jason and Genevieve, also sued the Safra estate. They said they had been tricked into accepting a paltry settlement. They hadn't been made aware of the facts of their mother's autopsy report when they made that deal. It came out in trial that Torrente had incurred contusions on the base of her skull. Blood was found in her thyroid and bruises on her knees. Safra's DNA was found beneath her fingernails, and her DNA was found beneath his. There were also allegations that his blood was found on her underwear.
Pathologist Dr. Jacques Wokelowitz denied these were signs of a struggle. We do wonder, though, what went on in that dressing room. If Maher had inflicted that damage, why wouldn't Torrente have mentioned that when in contact with the head nurse?
So did Safra indeed attack Torrente? Or could she have received such injuries in the desperate flight to safety, where Torrente was forced to hustle along the elderly billionaire, perhaps as he held tightly onto her? Could a frail old man have truly kept her from leaving? If she had been attacked, why did she not mention it on the phone? Then again, what else could account for those injuries? The Torrente children asked for $100 million, and the case was settled out of court. The Record of Hackensack, New Jersey, reported that Torrente's husband, Ireneo, had settled for $2 million.
Heidi Maher also sued Lily Safra. In 2003, she alleged she'd been tricked into traveling to Monaco to check on her injured husband, and then delivered to local police instead. She also filed for divorce against Maher. She had stuck by him throughout the fire and its aftermath, and local reports indicate she prayed for an acquittal. But when talking to CBS News after the conviction, she expressed doubts that she ever really knew the man she was married to. Relating her dismay over his escape attempt, she said, "I did the best I could to bring him home, but now it seems like he's doing his own job of screwing up, and I just can't be there forever to fix his mistakes." She questioned whether it was even healthy to have him in the lives of her children.
Maher served out the next few years of his sentence. Then something remarkable happened. In an interview with Le Figaro, Judge Jean-Christophe Houlin claimed that the Safra case had been fixed. That apparently set something in motion. Maher was released. On August 16, 2007, he touched down at the John F. Kennedy Airport in New York City. Shortly after he landed, he was served with a restraining order from his ex-wife Heidi.
So, was it true? Had Maher's trial been fixed? One thing that doesn't make sense to us is that Hulin continued to work on cases after this. If he's admitted to wrongdoing, that seems really weird. Our understanding from reviewing media reports is that Hulin's accusations remain in limbo. We don't see anything about them being confirmed or refuted. Lily Safra's lawyer, Mark Benot, called the whole incident into dispute, indicated that Hulin had barely anything at all to do with the case.
Suffice to say, it's all very weird.
Shortly after his release in 2007, Maher violated the terms of the order of protection when he stalked his ex-wife in Beekman, New York. He expressed anger to the press, saying that many of his loved ones had left him for dead. He accused Heidi of having severed his bond with his children.
Upon his release, Maher dispensed with the story of his own wrongdoing. He graduated to the role of the innocent American patsy locked up abroad by totalitarian Europeans. He was factually innocent, he insisted to the media. He had been framed. Monica wanted a fall guy. Russian hitmen had obviously been involved. He had only confessed because the police had threatened him and his family. He had no choice. Also, he couldn't speak French, so of course he'd been tricked into confessing. For what it's worth, Safra's biographer, Gross, strongly disputes this, noting the consistent simultaneous translation that occurred throughout the legal process.
We will now give you our opinions on the murders of Safra and Torrente. After all, this crime was already adjudicated long ago. To start out, we would say that we understand the strong interest in the intriguing, salacious elements of this crime. The elements that most trouble us about the case are the fact that Safra's bodyguards were dismissed and the possibility that the fire might have destroyed clues. The possibilities that flow from those two facts raise alarm bells.
But let's look at the evidence we do have, shall we? No intruders were detected by any of the penthouse's elaborate security measures. They were not captured on any surveillance cameras either. The only one who ever saw these men seems to have been Maher. In Maher's account, his attackers were armed with knives. They seemingly ended up stabbing him with his own knife. That seems like an odd choice for international hitmen assigned to snuff out a hugely important billionaire. Why weren't they packing? These alleged evildoers also made a bad go of things. They couldn't even manage to kill or subdue one unarmed nurse, or actually murder their elderly target before he escaped into a dressing room. The best of us make mistakes at work, but the intruder theory forces us to imagine a hit team that was simultaneously inept at directly killing victims, but also excellent at escaping police and a smoky penthouse undetected, in a principality known for its extensive network of surveillance cameras. Are we to believe these attackers were so lucky that their would-be victims, would-be saviors' big idea for a rescue was to set a fire that just happened to spread out of control?
Shocking developments like the bullets allegedly pulled from Safra's body turned out to be fabrications. Rumors about Safra's family and possible enemies seem to largely hinge around speculation. Sure, it sounds like Safra did indeed have enemies. We imagine that many of those enemies were connected enough to afford a hit squad capable of doing more than inadvertently killing a target.
Disturbing elements like the fact that Cohen was prevented from launching a rescue attempt could easily be explained by overzealous, inexperienced, or incompetent first responders. And we don't know. We tend to think they ought to have allowed Cohen to try, because it sounds like he was very competent and he might have gotten to Safra and Torrente in time. But we're not police officers or firefighters. Maybe the actions of those at the scene led to 2 deaths. Maybe they prevented a 3rd death. We tend to think the latter, but either way, we can see that having happened in good faith.
The fact that the fire spread to the point where it was out of control could also go either way. Our read on the situation is that the police, on the lookout for armed commandos, delayed the firefighters from going in. The firefighters were therefore left to battle an increasingly dangerous fire, setting back rescue efforts. All the security measures may have slowed them down from accessing the dressing room, and if Torrente's family's allegations are correct, then Safra's anxieties prompted him to stay put and prevent his nurse from fleeing. All of that is awful, but ultimately it all stems from the actions of Maher. Everyone involved was paralyzed with fear over these non-existent hitmen.
Safra's decision to dismiss his bodyguards that day is troubling and certainly unfortunate, but we haven't seen that story disputed by Cohen, who would know. And Safra was in his personal fortress. Perhaps the portrait out there of him as a man living in fear was a bit more complicated. Maybe he just didn't think anything could happen in such a secure location.
The fact a judge came forward casting doubt on the outcome of the trial is disturbing. That seems like the most salient point in all of this. Regardless of actual guilt, if a defendant's trial is rigged, then the results ought to be thrown out. But it seems hard to evaluate the judge's claim, given there have been no other developments reported in the English-speaking press.
Meanwhile, let's just say that Maher's original story made very little sense. His confession, on the other hand, hangs together with the fact that the alleged phantom assassins managed to completely bungle the job while also leaving no trace. Because in his confession, the murderers were only in his mind.
We should note that Maher got the opportunity to tell his own story. In 2021, he published a book titled Framed in Monte Carlo, How I Was Wrongfully Convicted for a Billionaire's Fiery Death. The book's blurb indicates that Maher is still chasing the real killers. Griffith, his old attorney, wrote the foreword. Skyhorse Publishing was the publisher. His co-authors were listed as Jennifer Thomas and Bill Hayes.
The book was clearly written to settle scores. Not just scores pertaining to the alleged wrongful conviction either. The book goes in depth into anecdotes about Maher's ex-wives. He talks about how he blackmailed one by threatening to release tapes proving her adultery to, quote, every relative, friend, uncle, and cousin of hers, so that, quote, everyone is going to know what a little whore she is. That has nothing to do with the case. He just wanted to share that with everyone.
He also reserved barbs for other figures in the case. His wife Heidi supported him for years, only to coldly betray him. He wrote that Nurse Herkrath was suspicious of him from the jump because he was a, quote, white male who intimidated her with his nursing prowess. He even trashes Lily Safra, the widow of his victim, darkly alluding to her possible involvement in a wider conspiracy to kill her husband. In the end, his thesis appears to be that the man pulling all the strings was Russian leader Vladimir Putin.
To be completely frank, in my opinion, Maher comes across somewhat poorly in his own narrative. And that is putting aside any opinions on whether or not his claim that his conviction was unjust is credible. I believe it is more than understandable for a wrongful conviction narrative to include quite a lot of anger. Anyone who has been unfairly locked up for years is entitled to be angry and to express fury with the system and with any individuals who are part of the system. That makes sense. But this is not that. This comes across like a man straining to present himself as an innocent dupe, but simultaneously as a misunderstood macho guy who throws out phony-sounding tough talk lines to just about everyone he tangles with. Oh, and most of the women in his life wrong him for some reason.
Before the book even came out, Maher was gone. He had slipped into a brand new identity, changing his name to Jon Green. From here on out, we will call him by his new legal name, Jon Green. He took on a job as a long-haul truck driver. He happened to stop by Dr. Kim Lark's Carlsbad office with a medical question. The two stayed in touch. They started dating. They wed on Valentine's Day of 2020. Early on, he told Dr. Lark who he was, all about his dark past. He told her he was an innocent man, framed and locked up in an unfamiliar land. She believed him. Life might have appeared to settle down then. For proponents of his innocence, this was a time for him to heal from his wrongful conviction. For those who believed him guilty but imagined he had never intended any lasting harm, perhaps this represented a chance to atone and stabilize. But instead, things just got weirder.
After 3 years, the relationship between the couple broke down. Speaking to NBC, Dr. Lark characterized Green as increasingly erratic and verbally aggressive. She started to hide her medications from him. Dr. Lark's 3 dogs stopped liking Green. In fact, one of her border collies, Storm, started actively hating him. Things spiraled. They separated on March 31st, 2022.
As it turns out, Green had gotten into somewhat similar trouble before. In 2016, he was arrested for domestic violence-related assault in Tennessee.
Police and prosecutors say Green escalated matters after separating from his wife. On April 1st, 2022, Dr. Lark warned Green that she would file a restraining order against him. The following day, a Saturday, he broke into Dr. Lark's closed medical office and stole her checkbook, paycheck, and a gold iPad. He spent a few days trying to deposit her check and moving around money to the tune of thousands. Police say he was ultimately looking to steal around $44,000.
On April 4th, 2022, at 12:25 p.m., Officer Judy Brakeman was sent out to a location of the Carlsbad National Bank on National Parks Highway. A bank employee had called in because she was concerned about a customer named Jon Green. He appeared to be trying his best to cash a fraudulent check. He wanted $9,900 in cash and $44,000 on a cashier's check. His identification said Jon Green, but he had signed Kim Lark as his name.
Another call came into the Eddy County Sheriff's Department. This time it was Dr. Kim Lark. She said her ex-husband Jon Green was trying to steal her paycheck. That same day, she filed a restraining order against him, although she didn't think the sheriff's office had found Green to serve him. She was calling because she had been robbed. When Dr. Lark went through the desk drawer in her office, she found her paycheck missing. Back when things were good between the couple, Green had often deposited her checks for her, due to her busy schedule. She was the primary breadwinner in the relationship. But now, things were different. The bank ended up calling Dr. Lark to ask her if she had authorized Jon Green to act on her behalf. At that point, Green had already been able to transfer $17,000 from her savings into her checking account. After hearing from Dr. Lark, the bank ended up reversing that and putting all her accounts on hold, even while Green was still attempting to withdraw the $44,000.
Officer Brakeman got to the bank and talked to Green, who immediately identified himself as Theodore Maher. He complained to the officer that the bank teller had seized his driver's license. He dug in his wallet and found an additional government identification card that had his name as Theodore Maher. The teller then passed on the Texas driver's license that said he was Jon Green. Officer Brakeman confronted Green. Why had he lied about his name? He retorted that he was not lying, that he had legally changed his name due to his military background. Green walked outside and then kept walking, ignoring Officer Brakeman, as she told him she wanted to speak further with him. She hurried after him, grabbing his arms as he reached for his car door. He pulled away from her and got in. Officer Brakeman pulled out her taser and warned Green that she would tase him as he cranked the vehicle into reverse. She shot the taser into his lower abdomen. Unfazed by the jolt of electricity, he sped away in reverse, bumping over curbs and barely missing a light pole. Officer Brakeman recorded the license plate number, but it was too late. Green got away. He was in the wind.
Carlsbad Police Department Detective James Devlin, a 15-year law enforcement veteran, took on the case. On April 6th, 2022, he met with Dr. Lark. She shared that she thought Green might be abusing substances and that she was very afraid of him. Charges were filed against Green on April 7th, 2022. Dr. Lark filed a petition for the dissolution of the marriage a few weeks later, on April 25th.
The whole mess with the dog napping happened on May 12th of that year. So let's talk about Dr. Lark's dogs for a minute. These were not just family pets. These were search and rescue dogs. Dr. Lark trained and worked with them. The American Veterinary Medical Association even lists her as having deployed with her dog Sage to the Pentagon after the 9/11 terrorist attacks. So training and working with search and rescue dogs had long been a passion of hers.
In 2022, Dr. Lark had 3 dogs, Felony, Storm, and Zero. Each one was a nationally certified search and rescue dog. NBC did a report that contained lots of details on the trio of canines. Felony was an 8-year-old Dutch Shepherd who couldn't hack it as a police dog because she was too polite to bite. Storm was the 7-year-old great-great-granddaughter of the famous Sage, who had worked with Dr. Lark on 9/11. In May of that year, 4-year-old Zero was heavily pregnant with puppies. They all meant a great deal to Dr. Lark, emotionally speaking.
After his ex-wife left for work on May 12th, Green kicked down her door. He stole her spare 2015 Ford Expedition key fob, along with a 2004 Toyota Camry key fob, 30 pills of Ambien, and 40 pills of Valium. Then he headed to her workplace, a Carlsbad hospice. Dr. Lark had brought her trio of dogs to work that day, leaving them in her car with the doors locked and the air conditioner on blast. She often brought them to work to play with the patients.
From the hospice, Dr. Lark and another witness suddenly heard a cacophony of barking. They ran out into the parking lot to see Dr. Lark's car, a maroon 2015 Ford Expedition, speeding away. A small silver SUV trailed behind, probably Green's accomplice, Dr. Lark reasoned.
At 8:18 a.m., Dr. Lark called Detective Devlin. She sounded devastated and distraught. She told him that Green was back. He had stolen her car. He had her dogs, her Smith & Wesson gun, her Apple iPad, and her wallet.
Detective Devlin showed up at the scene to interview witnesses. Meanwhile, Dr. Lark tried to track the iPad that had been in the car. She locked onto its location and sent the detective screenshots. Together, they watched the dot representing the iPad drift toward Texas. Then it suddenly stopped, frozen on the map. They reasoned that Green had likely found the device and hurled it out the window of the car.
The following day, another witness came forward to confirm Dr. Lark's worst fears. He'd come across a Ford Expedition with a flat tire, pulled along Interstate 40 near Amarillo, Texas. He pulled over to help out. The driver was a jittery guy wearing sunglasses and a mask. He kept rushing the witness to change the tire faster. The whole interaction was weird. The next day, the witness saw a social media post from Dr. Lark about the missing dogs. He was certain that the jumpy driver was Green.
When Dr. Lark started digging through the things Green left behind in her rather empty home, she found a pile of creepy latex masks encased in plastic. She told NBC that she wondered if the entire relationship had been some kind of long con. The Carlsbad Police Department went as far as putting an all-points bulletin out for the dog napping and theft suspect. More charges were filed against Green.
Of course, Dr. Lark was mostly concerned about getting her rescue dogs back. At that time, there was reason to believe that Green might have gone to San Antonio, Texas. So, Dr. Lark reached out to Abel Pena, a private investigator based in San Antonio. The retired law enforcement officer was tasked with finding the missing dogs. He decided to start by mapping out Green's likely contacts. One of them likely was keeping the canines for the fugitive. An array of investigators was working on seizing Jon Green, including the FBI's San Antonio office, the San Antonio Police Department, the Bexar County Sheriff's Department, the Carlsbad Police Department, and, according to Pena, a private investigator from California named Ray Davis.
On June 13, 2022, the FBI received a tip that Green was in a Veterans Affairs hospital in San Antonio. They arrived on the scene and arrested him for burglary, larceny, forgery, and fraud. But what about the dogs?
Patience. Pena was still working on Green's contacts. He told the Carlsbad Current-Argus that he tracked down Green's romantic partner's aunt. He approached her and interviewed her about the missing dogs. She broke immediately. She not only had Felony Storm and Zero, she also had Zero's 8 newborn puppies. If you're like us, you're probably feeling quite relieved right now. Pena let his client know that he had found all of the dogs, and Dr. Lark quickly got all her animals back.
In July of 2022, the prosecution filed several expedited motions for pretrial detention against Green, meaning they wanted him to be held in custody pending trial for forgery and dog napping, amongst other things. They argued he was a danger to the community, specifically to his ex-wife. In September of that year, Green waived his preliminary hearing. Unfortunately, that wasn't the end of the saga with Green. The crimes of theft and dognapping are emotionally scarring for sure. But at the end of the day, no human beings or canines were physically harmed in this situation.
But then, in March of 2023, Dr. Lark received Gonzalez's letter. Remember Gonzalez from the top of the episode? He's the inmate who was incarcerated with Green for months, who claims he overheard a whole murder plot. In the letter, Gonzalez revealed to Dr. Lark that he knew for a fact that Green wanted her dead. Gonzalez was vague, but said he could provide her with details, times, names, and more, if she could just help him with his $40,000 bond. Instead, Dr. Lark called the authorities. Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Task Force Officer Kevin Matthews and Detective Garrett Silva responded, arriving at her home on March 27, 2023 at noon. Lark showed them the letter. The investigators noticed one odd detail in the conversation with Lark. She kept referring to her husband, a man named Jon Green, as Ted. Background checks later filled them in on the bizarre Monte Carlo backstory.
TFO Matthews got to work. He obtained tapes of jail calls between Green and others. He listened in. Many of the calls were to Jennifer Thomas and Bill Hayes. They are writers, and they co-authored the Framed in Monte Carlo book. Green's conversations with them were innocuous. He talked about selling or refinancing his house. He also wanted to write a new book with his old co-authors and get someone to make a documentary about some incident in Monaco. Green would also bring up Dr. Lark. He said he didn't even know how he could have even been busted for theft, given that he was only taking community property.
TFO Matthews apparently heard enough. The next day, he and Detective Silva headed out to Texas. They wanted to talk to Gonzalez, the inmate willing to do good, for a price. They got to the Taylor County Detention Center at 2 p.m. After the introductions and the Miranda warning, Gonzalez was immediately hyped. He punched his hand in the air. "I'm so glad y'all are here to see me." He knew exactly why they had come. That whole thing with Jon Green trying to kill his wife. He told the investigators what he knew, free of charge. He gave them Green's bunk bed discussions with Markham, the fentanyl overdose scheme, the whole deal.
After that, the investigators pulled calls from Markham. The calls proved the exchange of money for Markham's bond occurred. According to the probable cause affidavit, Thomas and Hayes were involved in getting that money to one of Markham's contacts. Let's be super clear here, though. The documents do not indicate in any way that anyone other than Green and Markham knew what that money even was for. We should not be jumping to any conclusions about folks helping out somebody they know who is in jail and therefore unable to access their finances. In most situations, that's a nice thing to do. We also don't have the full story from the PCA, of course. This is the state's side of the case. We're waiting to hear more from the defense. In the meantime, here's a quick statement from Thomas that gets more at their perspective. Here's what she has to say. Despite many inaccuracies in the PCA, it does appear to be compelling. However, another narrative explaining the facts also exists. Due to the ongoing case, my husband and I can't say more at this time, but would welcome a follow-up discussion at a later date. We'd just like to say that we'd love to chat with them and anyone with a perspective on this case whenever works. On May 25th, 2023, TFO Matthews met with Markham at the Eddy County Detention Center. The investigator ordered Markham uncuffed and advised him of his Miranda rights. The conversation turned to dogs, Markham's dogs. The inmate revealed that he had one, the other went to a shelter during his last stint in jail.
Then Matthews asked about Jon Green. Markham spilled right away. He revealed Green had asked him to kill his wife. Markham said he'd do it without intending to ever make good on the agreement. He just wanted to bond out of jail. Now that Markham was back in jail on a parole violation, he was terrified of running into Green again.
On the afternoon of September 8th, 2023, prosecutor Robert Parazynski and defense attorney B.W. Stone convened before District Court Judge the Honorable David E. Finger. They went over the plea agreement for Green's April 2022 crimes. The state dismissed a number of charges, and Green pleaded no contest to the rest. About an hour later, Parazynski and Stone were back, this time before District Court Judge the Honorable Jane Schuler Gray. The parties had come to another plea agreement for the dog napping and the other various May 2022 crimes. Green pled no contest to a few, and the rest were dismissed. He was hit with $520 in total fees and suspended prison time. As part of his parole conditions, he was ordered to keep away from his ex-wife, her business, and her home, and required to wear an ankle monitor.
But of course, this was only the beginning for Green. By then, authorities were aware of the murder plot. That same day, Detective Silva filed an affidavit for an arrest warrant with Judge Megan Fish. Green was now charged with criminal solicitation.
On September 11th, 2023, Assistant District Attorney Martin P. Wolfson submitted a filing asking for pretrial detention once again. He described Green as a danger to the community and a flight risk.
The defendant solicited the murder of Dr. Lark, the assistant DA wrote. The defendant made concerted efforts to recruit a fellow inmate to murder Dr. Lark. The defendant arranged payments through others on the outside to secure the release of an inmate for the purpose of murdering his estranged wife. He also brought up Monaco. The defendant was convicted of a double homicide by arson occurring in the Principality of Monaco in 1999.
On September 20th, 2023, Eddy County District Attorney Diana Luce submitted a filing labeled Criminal Information against Green. The state alleged Green had committed the crime of criminal solicitation to commit first-degree murder, willful and deliberate, on or about January 9th, 2023. The court held a preliminary hearing. Eddy County Detention Center Administrator Billy Massinghill, Greg Markham, and TFO Kevin Matthews were listed as witnesses. In a way, Green came full circle. He is back in jail, facing murder-related accusations. In another way, this is all new for him. He isn't an American locked up abroad in exotic Monaco. He instead finds himself awaiting trial in New Mexico. His almost victim in this case is not a powerful billionaire leading a mysterious life, it's his ex-wife. As a result, the murder solicitation case has not gotten any press coverage so far. The underlying motives contrast too. Instead of a haphazard plot to win the undying gratitude of a billionaire, he's accused of a deliberate, cold plot to kill a woman he once professed to love, and make it look like an accident.
In researching this case, it surprised us to see how many journalists appeared to buy into Maher/Green's claims of innocence, given the evidence collected in Monaco seemed to point directly to him. For some reason, a complex murder conspiracy was easier to believe than the possibility that a clean-cut American soldier nurse might have done something bad. It's a reminder that many dislike the idea that most crimes, including and perhaps especially murders, are fundamentally stupid affairs.
That is understandable. If a murderer is going to essentially sacrifice a human being in pursuit of their goals, we want it to mean something. We want symbolism. We want an epic about fraying family bonds in a banking dynasty, or a spy thriller about hooded assassins. Something bigger than an aggrieved employee half mad over his own pathetic need to ingratiate. We crave a better antagonist than that. But that's often not realistic. Criminals are rarely geniuses, and violent crimes are often highly emotional and poorly thought out.
Maher/Green has not had his day in court. We will have to wait to see how these latest charges against him play out. We must wait to hear his defense before we draw any hard conclusions. Jailhouse snitches are problematic in our view, although the level of corroboration included in the probable cause affidavit does quell some of those concerns in this instance. This is not a case that appears to rely on just one account. It appears that multiple witnesses are backing one another up, and that there are underlying financial records at play too.
That being said, none of that gets into the question of why this might have happened. Most of us would agree that Maher/Green had a rather light sentence in Monaco, considering he was convicted of engineering a plot where 2 victims choked to death on fumes. If history has indeed repeated itself, and Maher/Green's alleged schemes are borne out by the evidence once the smoke clears, then what does that tell us? What kind of person squanders the chance to start over? The chance to live a life spent free beneath the wide New Mexico sky? Who throws that away, even in the face of complicated relationships, tricky financial issues, and impending divorce? Perhaps Maher/Green would tell us that we were asking the wrong questions. Because we'll be curious to see if any of his prior fanciful claims make it into his defense this time around. Could the hooded hitmen be back, eager to smother a possible Netflix deal? Are the Russians colluding with authorities in Eddy County, New Mexico? Could the elusive Mr. Green be the most unlucky patsy in history? We suppose we'll simply see how things go with this case. Until then, we're just glad that no one was murdered in New Mexico and that the assorted kidnapped dogs and puppies are safe. We reached out to Jon Green's counsel for comment, along with Carlsbad Police Department, the Eddy County Prosecutor's Office, and Dr. Kim Lark. We don't have any statements to share from any of them at this time.
In discussing the alleged modern-day murder plot of Jon Green, we relied upon court documents and media accounts of the dog-napping incident.
In our recounting of the crimes of Theodore Maher and the lives of Edmond Safra and Vivian Torrente, we cited a wide range of sources. We'll read those out here and include relevant links in our show notes. These sources include publications responsible for reporting on the case, as well as all the various outlets we accessed in order to learn about the case on newspapers.com.
The Age of Melbourne, Australia.
The American Veterinary Medical Association.
The Arizona Republic.
The Associated Press.
A Banker's Journey. How Edmond J. Safra Built a Global Financial Empire by Daniel Gross.
The Berkshire Eagle.
The Calgary Herald.
The Carlsbad Current Argus.
CBS.
The Chicago Daily Herald.
CNN.
Court TV.
The Daily Citizen of Beaver Dam, Wisconsin.
The Democrat and Chronicle of Rochester, New York.
Forbes.
Fox San Antonio.
Framed in Monte Carlo. How I Was Wrongfully Convicted for a Billionaire's Fiery Death by Ted Maher, Bill Hayes, and Jennifer Thomas.
Gilded Lily, Lily Safra, The Making of One of the World's Wealthiest Widows by Isabel Vincent.
The Guardian.
The Jewish Week.
The Kennebec Journal.
KRQE.
The Los Angeles Times.
MSNBC.
The National Post of Toronto.
NBC.
Newsweek.
The New York Daily News.
The New York Post.
The New York Times.
The Ottawa Citizen.
The Poughkeepsie Journal.
The Record of Hackensack, New Jersey.
Seacoast Online.
The St. Cloud Times.
The Sunday Times of Ridgewood, New Jersey.
The Sydney Morning Herald.
The Tallahassee Democrat.
The Tampa Bay Times.
The Telegraph.
Time.
The Times.
The Times Colonist, Victoria, Canada.
The Times of Israel.
The Times of Munster, Indiana.
Vanity Fair.
Vendetta, American Express, and the Smearing of Edmond Safra by Brian Burrow.
The Wall Street Journal.
The Washington Post.